Welcome to the Kola 101 orientation. I am recording this orientation for the benefit of those who may not have an immediate opportunity to attend the live presentation. While I realize there is tremendous value in the live format because it reinforces direct member-to-member relationships, which are critical for building social cohesion within a time bank, I also acknowledge that Chicago is a large city, and I may not be available to host an orientation for every neighborhood which requires one. If you're viewing this orientation as part of the member application process, I highly encourage you to attend a future orientation with the group. These spaces offer a tactile experience in time banking, which creates deeper and more authentic trust networks within the time bank because we are able to match faces, names, and shared experiences to an online profile. Thank you for viewing this orientation, and I hope you find the information valuable. Welcome to the Kola 101 orientation. In this orientation, I will offer some historical background on time exchange, bartering, and other early economic practices, relate these practices to the modern resurgence of time banking, weave the history of time banking within mutual aid organizations and cooperatives, and talk about specific guiding visions and goals that underlie the reason why I thought it was necessary to establish the time bank in Chicago at this time. So first, what is time banking? Time banking is defined as the reciprocal exchange of services using time as a currency. So essentially inside of time banking, everybody has time. Everybody has an hour or 2 hours or however, whatever the unit of time is, and they are free to exchange that time for services inside of the time bank. So perhaps there's a service that you see someone has posted, such as massage therapy, such as yard work, such as house cleaning or organizing. Any of these services might be things that would be available in the time bank. You can go in the time bank and you can request use of those services. You can request someone to assist you with those services. They would come over, they would provide assistance with those services. You would issue them a time dollar, or as we call it in our time bank, a Kola, and then for that it would be stored in the time bank in their statement, and then they could go and spend their time dollars or their Kola elsewhere inside of the time bank for a service that they might want. And that service doesn't have to be the same thing as what they offered you. It can be anything else that's offered on the time bank. So we're using our time as a currency. We're using using it as a medium of exchange so that we can obtain services and receive services within the time bank. And the time bank is founded on this idea of social infrastructure. So social, of course, is dealing with our relationships and the sort of skills and abilities that we have, our social capital. And infrastructure is a framework in which other activity happens. So social infrastructure is simply the framework in which we exchange our social capital. So in the time bank, we're grounded on a trust network. We are a trust network that's grounded in reputation. And social infrastructure simply means that if we can find ways to create tremendous numbers of overlapping connections between each other inside of the time bank, we can expand our trust network, we can expand the value of the social capital, we can build our social infrastructure, and ideally that social infrastructure becomes a safety net that can support us when we are down, when we don't have the financial capital to obtain services. We still have the time bank and we still have that social capital that we can use in order to obtain some of the things that we might need. One of the founding principles of time banking is time equity equals work equity. And that simply means that everybody's hour is equal inside of the time bank. And the reason that that is necessary is because when you think about the roles and responsibilities, when you think about the types of work that are available in the community or that are required of the community, all work is necessary in the community. If any assignment that someone is currently doing, if any work that someone is currently being compensated for in the community would drop out, then the community would not function as efficiently as it is currently functioning now. You know, there might be other people who might be assigned the task and they might not be able to do it as well. So what we're doing inside of this space when we're saying time equity equals work equity is we're simply saying that everybody's work is valuable. Everybody's work is necessary for us to form a community, and we want to respect the equity of work. We want to respect that the necessity of all of these different functions that make up a community. So this community is an ecosystem, and if any element of that ecosystem dropped out, the ecosystem would not function in the same way that it's functioning now. In our time bank, I've mentioned we have one Kola. One Kola equals 1 hour of service. So, if you're trading, 2 hours of service, you would be giving 2 Kola and incrementally upward. So 1 Kola simply means 1 hour of service. You might also hear Kola referred to as a time dollar. These are all equivalent terms. It simply means 1 hour of service. Time-based currency sits atop the fabric of trust within the community. So again, a time-based currency, a time exchange, a time bank is a trust network. We are grounded in trust. So you come in with a certain level of trust. Perhaps there are people that you already know within the time bank. There are organizations that you are already part of within the time bank. And then there are people that you meet within the time bank. So you may not have the same level of trust with those people that you have just met within the time bank as you have with those people that you know, but essentially we are building a fabric of trust. So we're trying to establish relationships between you and the people that you may not know, because if we can establish that trust network and that trust network is connected to the trust networks you already have established, then again, we're building that social infrastructure, we're building those points of contact between members of the community so that we can have a much larger trust network that we can take advantage of, and that we can spread our social capital around, which again, it supports the burden in the community. If everybody carries a little, no one has to carry a lot. So time-based currency is simply living within the fabric of trust within the community. Because money is a form of transferable trust. Now, in terms of the way that we use money now, we reassign our trust to an issuing body such as the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve issues a currency that we can then spend with the providers of goods or services. And so we don't necessarily have to trust the provider that they will value everybody's service equally. We simply trust the currency, right? And so we've reassigned our trust outside of the community to entities and to bodies outside of the community. And therefore, what we're doing when we reassert time bank in the community is we're bringing that trust back in. We're saying, I am going to figure out a way to build a level of trust, build a trust network with my neighbor, with members of my community, as opposed to reassigning that trust away. So we're going to have a level of trust. We're going to create a currency that serves us, and we're going to have exchanges that are grounded in values and things that in the things that we value. And then there are different forms of money. So the Kola nut would represent what might be called a commodity currency. And a commodity currency simply means that a consumable good is used as a medium of exchange. Then there are representative currencies such as the gold standard, which is where, a piece of paper has a particular amount that it's redeemable for in the equivalent amount of gold. And currently we have the fiat currency, which is the US dollar, which is backed by the full faith and credit of the American people, or the trust and confidence of American people. And so if that confidence ever fell out, then the value of the dollar might fluctuate accordingly with that confidence dropping out. And then finally we have the most recent arrival, the digital currency, which is backed by the trust in an algorithm. And the key criteria of a currency. So again, at the very top level of the key criteria is trust. So you have to have trust in that those who issue the currency are going to maintain the integrity of the currency. They're not going to allow the currency to be artificially manipulated or devalued. You're going to have the same $5 bill as when you walked out of the house when you get to the store, right? And so you have the trust at the top of the network, where you're trusting that issuing body, and you're trusting that the currency value is going to be maintained. You're trusting that when you get to the store, you're going to have that same level of value. So again, trust, integrity, and then finally transparency. So you have to have transparency in the currency that the people who hold the currency are aware of what sort of processes by which the currency is managed. They're aware of how the system is structured. They're aware of the fairness within the system and the equity. Now currently we don't necessarily have a great level of transparency within our currency, and we can't necessarily see how the equity is structured inside of our currency. So key criteria of currency: trust, integrity, and transparency. All things that we can provide within a time-based currency, which is a complementary community currency.
And then the functions of a currency. It's a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. So when we're using time banking, our unit of account would be 1 hour. The store of value would be our time bank. And the medium of exchange would be the online marketplace where people are posting their offers, posting their requests, and then we're engaging in the process of looking for things that we need in the offer section, or posting our request and posting things that we have to offer in that request section. So we have offers and we have requests. So the functions of a currency are well accomplished by time banking. And old currency to new currency. So what are pictured here are some forms of ancient currency. We have our cowrie shell, we have our kola nut, and we have our rhinestone. The cowrie shell and the kola nut, the cowrie shell was traded in parts of Africa and parts of Asia. The kola nut traded primarily in parts of Africa. The rhinestone is exchanged in parts of Polynesia. So the thing about the cowrie shell is that it has an additional value. Beyond being just a medium of exchange, it's also valued because it was used in sacred mask, it was used in jewelry, it was used in body adornment, it was used in a number of different ways, and so it had multiple layers of value. So it had a value as a medium of exchange, mostly because it had that other sacred value, it had that other intrinsic value to the people who were receiving it. The kola nut similarly has an intrinsic value in that when you consume kola, you can get a boost of caffeine, which staves off fatigue, which lessens hunger, and also when you are exchanging the kola nut in certain cultures, you're making a gesture of hospitality. So you're going to a village elder or a tribal chief and you're saying, I have this basket of kola and I want to open a level of trade with you. I want to open a trade channel with you, and so I'm giving you this basket of kola as a gesture of goodwill, of my intentions to continue in a trade relationship with you. And even when you go into some Nigerian homes, you might find that if you if someone does not offer you the kola, then you have reason to say that they have refused to welcome you into their home. So essentially, the cowrie and the kola nut, and even when we get to the rhinestone in Polynesia, the rhinestone, the way that it's exchanged is that these stones are far too large to move. And so what happens is there's an oral ledger that occurs. People have a common agreement that says, this stone belonged to me, but I'm giving it to you. I'm having an exchange with you. They communicate that exchange around to the village, and then they establish that community accountability. So there's an oral ledger that's kept of who owns what stone. So again, all of these types of ancient currencies are actually they're dual currencies, or they're currencies with multiple levels of to the transaction. The cowrie shell is sacred, the kola nut for hospitality, the rhinestone for community accountability. So we want to have a currency that not only accomplishes our desire to exchange currency for goods and services, but we want to have currencies that have developed into them, that have wrapped up into them other forms of capital that might be valuable to us. So in our current definition of economics, we have how society uses its scarce resources. Frequently we state that as the allocation of scarce resources to satisfy unlimited wants. So in both of these situations, what we notice in this definition of economics is that scarcity is highly valued. And certainly in our economy right now, scarcity is highly valued. If you can either find a thing that is scarce or soon to be scarce, or you can make a thing scarce, you can kind of induce artificial scarcity in a body of resources, then that resource becomes extremely and immensely valuable. And so what we're doing in our definition of economics is we're placing a much higher value on scarcity than on either conservation or on abundance. And so what I think might be a better definition of economics that we could subscribe ourselves to is the sustainable self-regulating relationship with an abundance of ecological resources, which adapts to the shifting availability of those resources. And the way that we can perceive that is that in nature, there's an abundance of ecological resources. Now, every single resource is not abundant, but we have an abundance of different types of ecological resources. So if we were to manage our relationship with those resources, being self-regulating, being sustainable, and shifting, the way that we consume those resources as they become less available, then we could allow those resources to restore themselves. Nature will restore itself. Nature is resilient in that manner. But right now, we have an economic system, again, that's valuing scarcity rather than valuing abundance. And so if we value the abundance of ecological resources and we value the preservation of those resources, then what we would create is a different type of economical system that honor the different types of capital that are available. And that leads me to this discussion of invisible capital. So one of the primary forms of invisible capital that I see, and the way that I perceive invisible capital, is capital that is mostly unseen. It's either unseen or it's largely ignored. So some of the capital that we ignore greatly is trust. Trust is a form of capital, and trust is tied to the other form of invisible capital, reputation. So the trust that you have with people becomes the reputation that precedes them. Because if you trust them and you speak highly of their behavior, then they will have a reputation that will travel, that will speak highly of people wanting to do business and wanting to deal with them. And that invisible capital is what I'm calling our economic mycelium. So if anyone knows anything about mushrooms, those mushrooms inject a root system down into the ground when they grow. And that root system not only transmits nutrients and resources for the body, for that mushroom body, but it transmits nutrients and resources for all of the other plants in the ecosystem. So wherever that mushroom is growing, it's not only serving as a pathway to transmit nutrients and resources for itself, but it's serving the greater good. It's serving the entire network. It's serving the entire ecology, the entire ecosystem. And so the invisible capital that we don't acknowledge is actually a form of economic mycelium. It's the network that would allow us to engage in other forms of exchange, to engage in transmitting other forms of capital, and to moving these different types of capital to places where they don't currently exist, or where they don't currently reside in great abundance. So we could move capital around. We could create capital flow that's a little bit more ready and more active than it is now with financial capital. And that leads me to a discussion of Appleseed Permaculture, who posted what's called the 8 forms of capital. And we see here the 8 forms of capital are cultural, experiential, intellectual, spiritual, social, material, financial, and living capital. The 8 forms of capital. So in our current economic system, we're intently focused on the financial capital, and to the detriment, or to the unawareness of these other forms of capital that exist. And when we don't pay attention to these other forms of capital, then we lose our ability to trade in these other forms of capital. So there's our social capital, there's our living capital. These are all forms that become invisible capital, because the only visible capital that we pay attention to, the only one that we're inclined to focus on, is that financial capital. But time banking allows us to utilize our social capital to obtain intellectual capital, to obtain experiential capital, to obtain cultural capital, to acknowledge all of these other forms of capital. What it really does is it allows us to spread our value around. So we can use financial capital for some things that we still need to use it for, but then we can use our social capital for some things that we need to use that for. We can use our intellectual capital for some trades, for some exchanges. And we can use all of these different types of capital in such a way that we accomplished, a sort of multi-layered budgeting approach. So you have money that you preserve for the specific things where you need money, but then you have time banking for all of these other types of services that you don't necessarily now need to spend money on. And that comes to the second, slide from the 8 Forms of Capital by Appleseed Permaculture. And it talks about capital pools and capital flows. Now, a time bank is a capital pool. It's a pool of social capital. And if you look at these intercapital flows and these intracapital flows, specifically, we can look at the intercapital flows. If a time bank is a pool of social capital and we have something that we want to learn, then what we are doing is we're using our social capital to trade for intellectual capital. If a time bank has it has an opportunity that we want to experience, a work of art or or a concert of some sort, then we are trading our social capital for cultural capital. So using this principle of these 8 forms of capital, what we are doing is we're using one form of capital to obtain or trade for another form of capital. And the importance of that is that currently, if you look at that line about financial capital and you look at the intra-capital flows, the financial capital is all locked up in about 4 institutions there. It's preserved by the banks, by corporations, by other businesses, and by governments. But individuals and community organizations have tremendous social capital. They have tremendous cultural capital. They have a great deal of intellectual and spiritual capital. And so if we were to acknowledge that this capital, that the other forms of capital, the non-financial capital, is housed in all of these other places, then we can see how, although we might not be rich in money or in finances, we are rich in all of these other ways. And that leads me to a discussion of how certain qualities show up inside of these different economic systems. So if we look at the gift, barter, and the market economies, if we specifically look at how trust presents itself in the market economy, what happens is, again, we're reassigning trust from the individual transaction up to an issuing body. So we're reassigning trust outside of the transaction. And so I don't have to trust the person that's with me in the transaction. I simply have to trust that the currency is of the value that the issuing body told me that it was valued at. And what that does is it creates very shallow relationships. If I don't have to establish trust with the person that's across from me, then I don't have to worry about how I maintain that relationship. I don't have to worry about attending to our social infrastructure. On the alternate side, if we look at the gift economy, you have a high level of trust. And for those who are not familiar with gift economic systems, I would highly recommend Lewis Hyde's The Gift or Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. Those will appear at the end of the presentation as well on a book list. But in the gift economic system, what you have is very small communities or small tribes, essentially. And what would happen inside of these tribes and these communities is that they would give away their goods, in a sense, not in a sense that they're expecting immediate reciprocation from the person that they're giving goods to, but they're giving their goods to another member of their tribe. So you're not giving anything away. You're not giving something to someone else. You're giving something to another part of yourself. So you had a high level of trust that not only in the person that you're engaging in the transaction with, but you had a high level of trust in the tribe. And so your level of trust in the community, that the community would actually support you and would hold you and would keep you and protect you, allowed you to be very giving with what you had, because if you needed it, you knew that you could go to another member of the tribe and they might have it. They might be able to offer it, which creates a deeper level of relationship, because you're not in a space where you're trying to protect your scarcity. You're not protecting your scarcity from another member of the tribe. What you're doing is you're very open with your giving. So what we want to do is we want to move towards those gift economic principles. And Charles Eisenstein actually offered a quote that could actually get us there, right? So if we talk about the gift economy, he says the gift economy represents a shift from consumption to contribution, transaction to trust, scarcity to abundance, and isolation to community. Contribution, trust, abundance, community. Now, a few of those things have actually already shown up for us. We know that we've recognized that a time bank is a trust network. We've recognized that in a different definition of economics, that we have an abundance of ecological resources, and ecology can be more broadly represented as just a community of, an ecosystem of living and non-living things. And then we recognize that these things happen when we honor, when we recognize ourselves as a community rather than as individuals. So if we move towards that gift economic principle through time banking, what we're doing is we're moving towards those qualities of contribution, trust, abundance, and community. Edgar Kahn and Chinyere Ote. Now, Edgar Kahn is the founder of time banking. Now, I put founder in quotes simply for the reason that what Edgar Kahn did was he codified a set of principles. He established a theory of time banking, but time exchange actually predates his theories. So time exchange has actually been in presence, in principle, for a number of for a century or so. But essentially, what Edgar Kahn was able to do in his text, "Time Dollars: the new currency that enables Americans to turn their hidden resource time into personal security and community renewal," is he established some core values of time banking. And those core values of time banking said that everyone is an asset, some work is beyond a monetary price, there's reciprocity in helping, social networks are necessary, and a respect for all human beings. And the way that he established these values was that he was working very closely at the time with the social service sector, and he saw that people were approached when they went to the social service sector to get help, to get assistance, they were approached with a deficit mindset. So what that said is that the person who's there to provision the services, who's there to interview them for the services, they were approaching them from the perspective that they had no value, they had nothing to offer, that they were essentially worthless, beyond the fact that they were asking for help. So then that creates a defensive posture. That means that if you see someone without value, then what you're trying to do is you're trying to ensure that they actually have nothing of value to offer. Okay, and so it creates a posture where you're actively trying to push people off of outside of social services. You're trying to push them out of the social service system, because you think that, as opposed to them having assets, or as opposed to them being a human asset, you're thinking that that perhaps they're lazy, that they have some quality that prevents them from actively going after work in the same way that you did. But what we recognize in time banking is that everyone is an asset. Everyone has skills. Everyone has abilities. Everyone has some sort of talent that may not be actively at this moment valued by the market economy. But if we honor that everyone is an asset, then we can honor that there is something that they could be doing that they may not be getting actively paid for at the moment. And the thing about that is, some work is beyond a monetary price. So some work does not show up in the GDP. Some work does not show up in our national economy. And the reason that it doesn't show up is because we don't value it. We say that we value, caring for elders and caring for children, but we recognize that, people who provide elder care, people who provide child care, can be some of the lowest paid workers in this particular economy. So some work is actually beyond a monetary price. The care economy is far beyond a monetary price because it provides a valuable service that allows us to go out and do other things that establish financial capital. But we don't necessarily honor that in our economic system, inside of our gross national or gross domestic product. And there's reciprocity in helping. So if we go out and we help someone, we're actually doing real work. And but again, what happens in our gross domestic product, in our GDP, is that if I don't receive dollars for the service that I offer, for the work that I do, if I'm caring for a family member and I'm not getting paid for that, and because I can't necessarily afford to pay a caregiver, if I'm doing some other work that is supporting my community and I'm not actively getting paid for it, perhaps I'm volunteering, perhaps I'm helping to, lift up a family business, there might be all of these sorts of things where I might not be getting paid, but that work is still highly valuable. And it's a reciprocal work. It's a work that boosts the community. And then, that social networks are necessary. So again, we're getting back to this principle of social infrastructure. We're getting back to this principle that if we can establish a social network that actually allows us to trade our social capital, then we can create a social economy. And this social economy is a place where we can actually obtain some of the needs that we are not currently able to obtain with financial capital. One of the other principles that Edgar Kahn wrote about in his text, No More Throwaway People, the co-production imperative, was this principle of co-production. And co-production deals with the way that you might design a service, or rather inside of the process of designing services, acknowledging that the best people to design a service are those who are actually using the service. So it's really about a community-led decision-making process for services that the community is accessing. So if you recognize that the people who are using the service are the ones who will have the greatest level of transaction with the service, the greatest level of interaction with the service, then you honor the fact that that is some intrinsic knowledge about how the service functions. Is the service operating efficiently? Does the service, ask the best questions? Does the service operate in a timely manner? All of these different things that you wouldn't necessarily know about because you're coming from the outside in to design the service. But the people who are actually receiving the service, the people who are accessing the services, are better aware about how the service functions than you might be. So if you actually involve them in the process of producing those services and staging those services, developing those services, then you have a level of expertise and a level of confidence that you would not have had if you didn't ask those questions. And time banking operates on that co-production principle as well, because members who join the time bank are not simply joining the time bank and just moving through the process with the time bank. They're actively engaged in the work of understanding how the time bank functions, deciding if it could function differently, if it might function better, and what changes might be involved in helping the time bank to get to that point where it's the best process, the best product for the members of the time bank. So, although Edgar Kahn developed the first theories around time banking, the first implementation of a time bank was at the Member Organized Resource Center, and it was called the More Time Dollar Exchange. Now, between 1991 and 2008, that exchange generated 670,000 time dollars. The minimum wage in 2008 was $5.15, and so the equivalent monetary value of those services was $3.5 million. Now, that slightly violates the principle of time dollars. You don't necessarily convert time dollars to real dollars, but that's actually just an example to show how much value was invested inside of that community where the time dollar exchange was established. And they had a number of services that they were providing inside of the Graysoul Settlement House, including the neighborhood college and more temps. Now, the neighborhood college service was a service where community members could come in and they could receive time dollars for teaching a skill or teaching a course. And the More Temp service was a place where when community members had actually built up their skill level, then they would actually be assigned to temporary work assignments, and they would build that work experience, and perhaps that could lead to other employment down the line. But essentially, this was a self-sufficiency network. This network was about self-determination. It was about a community recognizing that it had assets already inside of that space, inside of its social cohesion. It had communal knowledge that may not have been acknowledged by the overall economy, but the time exchange, the time bank, was able to acknowledge the value of that community insight, of that community competence, and it was able to allow them to exchange it, to engage with it, and to use it to continue lifting themselves up as a community together. So I came to time banking through the Kauri Collective. I met the founder of the Kauri Collective somewhere around 2013, 2014. And when I looked at the model that was established in St. Louis, I was highly impressed by how time banking was functioning there. And I was also impressed by her reasons for founding the time bank. So she initially founded the time bank because she was a new mother, and she valued motherhood. She valued staying home with her child. And so she wanted to be able to stay home with her child and then also take a few artist contracts and teaching jobs and things like that. And so she looked for a way that would allow her to invest in what she valued, which was her child, and then also to still obtain some of the services that she needed. So she looked at a few different models, came upon the model of the time bank, and established the Kauri Collective for that purpose. And so, again, we're looking at this time bank as a complementary community currency. It lives alongside other forms of capital. So she has some forms of financial capital that she's obtaining through the small artist contracts and things of that nature. But then she has the time bank for those services that are available within the time bank that she doesn't necessarily need to spend financial capital on, and so she can balance her budget in terms of where she wants to allocate her financial resources, where she wants to allocate her social capital and her social resources. So the Kauri Collective was established there in 2009. They have a number of partnerships with practitioners around the country, and she was featured as a panelist on the Bugs Conference in 2016. And the Kauri Collective currently has 226 members who have collectively traded 2,015 hours. They were featured on the Beautiful Solutions Gallery, which is the launch site for Naomi Klein's text, This Changes Everything. And they're also a member of Solidarity Economy St. Louis. So there's a lot of great work that continues to happen within the Kauri Collective and among its membership. Now, the platform that we've chosen for our time bank is called Our World. Our World currently has 44,519 members, representing 692 time banking communities who have collectively exchanged 2 million hours of service. That time bank management platform is designed to remove the technological barriers to developing and implementing a time bank, and that simply means that there are a number of other time bank platforms out there, but they're really difficult to maintain, and so what we wanted to do is we want to focus on the social aspect. We want to focus on building community. We want to focus on that collaborative aspect of developing a time bank. And in focusing on that collaborative aspect, we don't necessarily want our members or want our administrative staff to be hindered by the technology. So Our World represented a very good platform for us to do that. And they have a number of other partnerships with things like the Sustainable Economies Law Center and Transition Towns USA. And this is a representation of what a member might see when they log in. Now, this is introduced more broadly or trained more broadly in our Kola 201 orientation. So if you viewed the Kola 101 orientation video, then you should be able to log into the website once your account has been approved and view the Kola 201 orientation. And so if you log into the time bank, you get a page where you can see your hour statement, where you can view your account information, your account details, and make changes there. You can see what offers have been posted by members. You can see what members are requesting. You can see a list of the current members inside of the time bank. You have access to a groups function, and currently we have a mushroom hunters group on there. So one of our members, is very fond of foraging for mushrooms. So if you are also fond of foraging for mushrooms, you can connect inside of that group's platform with other members who are also interested in that. And then finally, you have an intertrade function, and that will be explained more in depth inside of the Kola 201 orientation. And this is an example of our offers page. I am currently offering a budgeting. So if you were on the time bank and you were interested in budgeting, you could respond to that offer. But there are a number of ways to filter the offers. You can filter the offer by distance. So if you're someone who's hyper local and you're not interested in traveling across the city to visit someone or to make an exchange, then you can limit the distance to 5 miles or 10 miles. However far you're willing to travel in radius of your zip code. And so, that allows members to really deeply engage with members of their community. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of my strategy for growing the time bank is really planting myself within communities and within organizations that come in as a group. It's really important that those groups come in because we want people to be able to leap into the time bank and to exchange immediately with someone that lives near them, as opposed to coming onto the time bank and not having anyone in the nearby area to trade with, and then becoming discouraged and dropping out of the time bank because they don't have anything on there that they can use at this time. And the Our World website has a mobile app. So they have mobile apps for both for both iPhone and Android. This is currently the Android implementation of that application. You can view announcements that have been made on the time bank. You can view the offers and request. Now the offers and request function, it leaves a bit to be desired, simply because when you open up the offers and request section, you get a list of all of the different categories, and you kind of have to poke through the categories to figure out where certain offers and requests are. But you do have a really robust search function. So if you use the search function, you can search certain keywords and figure out, if there are offers that are posted that have keywords that you're interested in. And then you have an hours function. So the hours function would allow you, if you are out and about, if you're working with someone and you wanted to report an exchange immediately, you could open up your mobile app, click on the hours function, and then immediately report those hours, whether you provided hours or whether you received hours, and then have those things show up in the time bank. And this is an example of the keyword search function. So I've searched for dress, and you see that it's pulled up a keyword with that might match the things that thing I'm looking for. And this is an example of the hours function. So again, if you provided hours or received hours, you could click on the hours button. You could choose the appropriate category of the hours that you're exchanging. You would then be allowed to pick the name of the member who you've exchanged with, and categorize the transaction, post the number of hours, and then submit that for recording on each of your statements. Now, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, she's done studies in terms of the way that childhood trauma shows up in adults. And so one of the things that she spoke about on an interview with Tavis Smiley was that one of the buffers to childhood trauma, to childhood adversity, was a healthy caregiver. And so that made me think deeply about social infrastructure, because if we want to establish healthy caregivers, what are the ways that we can do that? What are some of the ways that we can support the things that we value in our community? And I think we would value that children would be protected. And if we want to establish environments where we can protect children, we need to make sure that we are honoring the fact that we need social support systems, we need social infrastructure, we need social safety nets, so that those caregivers can feel supported. Because if those caregivers feel supported, then the children might feel more supported. So I think Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris's research speaks highly to that need for social infrastructure. And then Bruce K. Alexander did a study on something called Rat Park. And in Rat Park, he was studying the prevalence of addiction in rats that were in the study. And so you had one environment where a rat was kept in isolation. You had another environment where a rat was kept in community and had all sorts of other activities that they could engage in. And in each of these two different environments, what was seen was that the rat that was kept in a space of community, that had other activities that they could engage in inside of their environment, that they either did not become addicted or were less likely to stay addicted to substances that were administered through their water than the rats that were kept in isolation. Because what happens is you have a supportive community, you have a community infrastructure that's actually lessening their tendency to become addicted. And so that actually speaks to something that we've seen internationally in terms of, when you build a sort of structure around addiction that speaks to the fact that we are treating the human condition, we are treating the human as a patient, we are treating a medical illness in addiction, then what we can do is we can build a social infrastructure that allows a person who wants to come off of an addiction to actually integrate back into society. But we don't do that. We criminalize and we create punitive measures around people who are addicted, and so therefore we further isolate them from a social infrastructure that might actually support them in coming off of their addiction in a healthy way. Community is the only immunity. So whether we're talking about childhood trauma, whether we're talking about addiction, whether we're talking about about financial, equity issues, whether we're talking about inequality, the only immunity against these things that ail us is community. When we come together, when we build social infrastructure, when we build support systems that allow us to do different things, that allow us to collaborate and develop these ideas, then we are actually sharing our immunity with one another. We're sharing our best practices. We're sharing solutions to all of the problems that we might see within our community. And time banking actually offers us a way to build that shared immunity, to create that shared immunity, not only amongst our local communities, but again, we're talking about a trust network. So if your community, if your neighborhood represents a trust network, and you recognize on the time bank that there are other trust networks out there, then perhaps there's a best practice sharing session. So there's an issue that you see that one community is dealing with, and you want to have a community conversation, then a time bank might be a way to facilitate that. So the community organizations could actually trade time hours, where community organizations are visiting one another and apprenticing with one another around these different issues that we might have. But again, community is the only immunity. And where does social infrastructure lead? So when we're able to collaborate on social infrastructure, then what are the other things that we could collaborate on? Is it possible that, we could follow the Charlottesville, Virginia model and develop a local food hub? So the model that is being followed in South Shore with the Healthy Food Hub is that we're looking at food infrastructure. So we were able to build a supportive infrastructure where the people that, support the food hub felt taken care of. And so that allowed us to then focus our attention on what would food infrastructure look like. What does it look like when we have local food aggregation, local food production, local food distribution? What is it that we can do around that food infrastructure that then supports the broader community? And then we can look at from social infrastructure to organizational infrastructure. If we have a robust and supportive social infrastructure, and we have individuals in community who are able to participate more freely in organizations because they are not pressed by financial obligations, then what does that look like for our organizational infrastructure? If we again could have organizations that have overlapping resources, that have overlapping, and intersecting, processes inside of the time bank, then our organizational infrastructure might operate a little bit more differently. It might operate more like that mycelial network. And then there's strategic infrastructure. So this comes from a text called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown. And inside of that social infrastructure, it's possible that we could then, look at what our strategic infrastructure is. What are the ways that we engage these issues, that we engage strategically in solving the problems of our community? And so I think Adrienne Maree Brown offers a very prescient, a very focused and intentional space and a thought exercise on that when she talks about the emergent strategy being intentional, resilient because it's decentralized, adaptive, fractal, interdependent, uses transformative justice, and creates more possibilities. And there's certainly more to those terms, but our social infrastructure, having a cohesive social infrastructure, perhaps allows us to focus more on what our strategic infrastructure is as well. And then there's our ethical infrastructure. So this is the photo of the permaculture principles. And so the permaculture principles are what would underlie the ways that we interact with the world, the ways that we interact with our broader ecosystem of living and non-living things, the ways that we develop our social ecology and social economy. Our ethical infrastructure can fall underneath, or rather, is what constitutes the ways that we develop our society, develop our social structures. So our ethical infrastructure again is permeating, is weaving into our social infrastructure. And then there's practical infrastructure. So, what are the practices that might benefit your community? Is it experiential learning, participatory arts and music? Is it seed saving and forest gardening? Is it co-ops and eco-villages? Is it conflict resolution? Is it ethical investment? What are the practices that might benefit your community that you think might be best to show up inside of your community? So when you actually have a cohesive social infrastructure, when you have a supportive social infrastructure that is supporting the people that are doing work within your community that you highly value, then there are other things that they can focus on. We can again start to shift our attention not simply from surviving day to day, but from thinking about what are the community practices that might make our community a better place to live. And then finally, cultural infrastructure. So I am a child of New Orleans, and as a child of New Orleans, I remember looking at the impact of Hurricane Katrina and looking at the devastation that was wrought on the cultural infrastructure there because the social infrastructure had been so tremendously devastated. And what we see is that when social infrastructure comes apart at the seams, no one wants to protect cultural infrastructure. No one is available to protect cultural infrastructure because they don't have the amount of attention, the amount of mind share, the space in their head to actually focus on that. It seems so tangential and it seems so non-essential. But if we want to protect cultural infrastructure, if we want to protect cultural institutions and ensure that they are accountable to our communities, if we want our children to inherit ritual and inherit tradition, then the thing that we have to do, the thing that we have to focus on critically is our social infrastructure. Social infrastructure protects cultural infrastructure. If our social infrastructure is together, then again, we are given the necessary attention, we have the necessary level of focus, we have the time to attend to all of these other things that might be pressing in our community. But only if we have that ability to collaborate with each other, if we have that social infrastructure that ties us together, that makes us recognize that we are not one finger, but we are a fist. And this is a definition that Adrienne Marie Brown speaks about or employs in her text Emergent Strategy, which talks about emergence as a principle. Emergence is the way complex systems and patterns arise out of a multiplicity of relatively simple interactions. So what are those simple interactions? Those simple interactions are our ability to exchange with each other, our ability to greet one another, the way that we show up to a meeting, the way that we show up in the community, the way that our children see us. All of these things are relatively simple interaction, but out of these simple interactions emerge a very complex communal system. So we have all of these things that exist in our community that arise out of these simple interactions that we don't notice. So we tend to dismiss the simple interaction, but don't recognize how that simple interaction is a ripple, and that ripple echoes out and continues to echo out and gives us a condition in our community that either is, either we want to continue or we want to eradicate. However our community shows up, it's a system that develops out of these simple interactions. So if we could change a few key interactions, if we could create more positive interactions, if we could create inside of the time bank a way for more people to have contact with each other, to have more interactions with each other, then it's possible that we could impact other complex systems and diffuse other patterns that we might want to change inside of our community. And it goes beyond time banking. So beyond time banking, you get into things like, local exchange trading systems, rotating savings and credit associations, open collaboration, cooperative enterprise, crowdsourcing, and crowdfunding. All of these things are collaborative practices that we could cultivate inside of our community that could grow out of time banking. Because time banking is a really basic collaborative practice. It doesn't really take much to jump into the time bank and to begin exchanging with another member of your community. But once you've exchanged a small thing with another member of your community, once you have asked a member of your community to develop a website for you, once you have asked a member of your community to fix a car for you through the time bank, then what are the other ways that you can engage with that member of community? Is it possible that you all would be comfortable coming together in a cooperative business? Is it possible that you all might be comfortable coming together in a rotating savings and credit association? For those who are familiar, that's simply a SUSU or a TANDA. But what are the other ways that we could show up in each other's lives if time banking allowed us to take that first step towards communal and collaborative practice? And the time is right now. Now is just right now. So if we want to begin these things, then the first step begins simply with us engaging in one of these transactions. So if you end up joining the time bank, which I really hope that you do, then the first step inside of joining the time bank is, both posting an offer and posting a request. Don't hesitate on it and don't overthink it. Just, post one thing that you think you might be able to offer to someone else, and post one thing that you would really like to see or that you would really like to receive. And it might already be on the time bank, who knows, but now is just right now. Action steps. Join the Kola Collaborative. So here you can join the Kola Collaborative by going to join.kolanutcollab.org. That's join Kolanut Collab, KOLANUTCOLLAB.org. You can also get more information about the membership options and processes by just going to kolanutcollab.org. So if you go to kolanutcollab.org, that's the main landing page, and that has more information about sort of the membership types and tiers, and just some general information about how the time bank operates and what our mission and goals are. Also, you can attend the Kola 101 or 201 orientation and gain insight on time banking history and using the Our World platform. You can list your requests and offers for current and future members to locate them. You can share time banking with a friend and invite them to attend an information session. You can consider organizations in your community who might be practicing various forms of time exchange or even volunteering or gift economics, and offer time banking as an option for more efficient accounting of these exchanges. And that's a really critical one, because one of the things that I've been talking about with organizations in my area is that it's important for us to think about shifting from volunteerism to stakeholders, from volunteers to stakeholders. And what that speaks to is, what if there was something of value you could give to a volunteer, now a stakeholder? And if you could offer that person an hour an hour in the time bank for the time that they spend with the organization, how much more would that tie them into your organization? They're tied in now possibly because they're volunteering, but volunteering is a one-time transaction. So it's possible that, a volunteer might return, but generally they've gotten what they needed. They got the goodwill, they got, the good feeling that they might get from volunteering, and they're gone, and perhaps they want some novelty, so they want to go volunteer somewhere else. But if we had a stakeholder model where we were actually investing in our volunteers, and then our volunteers perhaps, if they don't want to use their time dollars for, anything for themselves, they might be reinvesting that time within us. So there's an opportunity for a deeper exchange to happen inside of that relationship between volunteers and an organization. And I certainly know for myself that on Saturdays when my block club meets, generally once a month, I am actually at another event. So I have an event every Saturday, that I attend the Healthy Food Hub in the South Shore area, and so I'm never there to meet with my block club. But I do value the work that my block club does. I do value the fact that they're meeting. So if there was an opportunity for me to invest some of my time dollars so that I could support the block club in doing the work that it needed to do, I would certainly do that. But here's a place where we can intersect or inject time banking, implement time banking that would allow us to support some of the other work that is being done in the community that perhaps we can't go and do directly, but we highly value that work. And here are some additional references, things that are guiding the way that I'm thinking about time banking right now, things that are guiding the way that I'm practicing time banking. So you have Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein, Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimbard, and People-Powered Money by the Community Currencies Association. And so these are all things, if you're interested in time banking, if you're interested in gift economics, if you're interested in the history of cooperation, these are texts that that I think would be highly valuable to you. And if you're on Goodreads, you can search for the Kauri Collective Strategic Reading Series. That's a reading series that I put together, with Chinyere, that kind of talks about some ways that social capital can be cultivated with inside time banking, ways that we can promote a more generative economy, a localized economy. And so there's some text there that, I think would be highly beneficial if you're interested in, expanding your awareness of how local economies operate. And finally, if it ain't mycelial, it ain't meaningful. And that simply means that if you don't connect your work to a much larger body of community, if you don't connect your work to a much larger social infrastructure, if you don't allow it to tie in to the deeper web of community, if you don't plug your work into that economic mycelium, that social network of your community, then your work will not last beyond you. And if you want your work to last, if you think your work is meaningful enough to last, then it is your responsibility to make sure that your work is tied into community, that your work has a succession plan, that your work is there to stay for the long haul. Thank you for viewing this orientation. If you have any questions, please contact me at connect@kolanutcollab.org. That's connect, CONNECT, @kolanutcollab.org. Thank you.